6 weeks ago, the deadly H5 bird flu strain reached Australian soil for the very first time. Now, it's been detected in over 100 cases across 4 states, and this week, the government confirmed the first H5 mass mortality event. It's warned of significant losses and a long, difficult journey ahead as attention turns to the impact of this outbreak on wildlife and agriculture.
It is not possible to avoid significant losses, which is what we're starting to see now.
Today, we are going to unpack what this means for Australian animals, the poultry sector, and your grocery bill.
I know we covered bird flu on the podcast in June, but a lot has happened since then.
Yeah.
For anyone who missed that episode, do you want to just quickly take us through A, what is bird flu, and B, why is this specific strain of bird flu so concerning?
Yeah, so bird flu, avian influenza, has been around for decades and decades. Most strains of the virus cause little to no disease, but we're talking about a strain called H5N1. It is different to most bird flu strains because it's highly pathogenic. Now, that just means that it spreads really rapidly between birds. It spreads easily between them, and it has a very high mortality rate. It kills a lot of animals. So since 2021, this strain of bird flu has caused what has been dubbed by scientists as a global animal pandemic. Hundreds of millions of wild birds around the world have been infected and killed. There have been mass die-offs in mammal populations, for example, in sea lions and seals, and it was detected on every continent except Australia until about 6 weeks ago. And that's when a sick seabird that had washed up off the coast of WA tested positive for H5N1.
And it has spread a lot since it first arrived or since we first detected it in Australia. Where are we at as we record this morning?
You're right, Billi. It has spread a lot since then. This has been incredibly fast moving. To give you a sense of how quickly it has moved, on the 16th of July, just a few weeks ago, we had 15 confirmed cases nationally. By the 29th of July, that was up to 27. This week, in an update from Agriculture Minister Julie Collins, the numbers were into the 70s. And then at the time of recording, the latest figures tell us that there are at least 102 cases nationally. That is across 5 states, WA, South Australia, Victoria, New South Wales and Queensland. But it should be noted the majority of cases, about or at least half, are in South Australia. Now, this week we got a major update when Agriculture Minister Julie Collins confirmed Australia's first mass mortality event. So the first mass death event from this virus when a large group of sick and dead seabirds found in South Australia on the state's southeast coast tested positive for H5. Now, Collins fronted the media with the Environment Minister, Murray Watt, on Monday, and he said this is the beginning of what is likely to be a long, difficult journey. Here is a little bit more of what Minister Watt had to say on that.
The reality is you can't stop native and wild birds flying around, and you can't stop wild animals moving around. And that will mean more mass mortality events like the one we have now seen.
And just quickly, Billi, multiple cases have now also been confirmed in seagulls. So preceding this week, most of the cases were in migratory seabirds that don't often come into contact with major densely populated areas that, nest and breed offshore. But now we've got seagulls carrying H5. That's significant because they are in every capital, in every regional town. They are known to be scavengers in bins, in car parks. They have this huge potential to spread the disease much farther and much more rapidly. So in other words, H5 is no longer contained to remote parts of the Australian coast.
And in terms of the wildlife that this poses a risk to, when you were describing the impact that we have seen overseas, you said that it's not just birds. You talked about sea lions. So is that a concern of what could happen here in Australia?
It's a major concern. Now, bird flu spreads a few different ways. It can spread through feces, it can spread through the water, can be airborne as an aerosol, and also any animal that comes into contact with an infected dead bird can pick the virus up. So any species known to scavenge, to eat dead birds, they are at a high risk. And there are really grave concerns, specifically in Australia, for our native bird life. Black swans, for example, have no prior immunity. They are considered to be at an extreme risk. Ecologists are warning that little penguins, the native penguin species here in Australia, are extremely vulnerable. There's a colony of about 1,400 little penguins in Melbourne. Experts are estimating 20 to 40% of that population will be wiped out, that this is no longer an if, more of a when. And as I mentioned, mammals are also at risk here. So there's concern for, in particular, Australia's endangered sea lion population. So there's some suspected cases of H5 that were found near Kangaroo Island's Seal Bay colony. That is home to about 5% of the entire global population of Australian sea lions. And their numbers are already sitting at very low figures. And there are these concerns now that that species could face functional extinction depending on the scope of this outbreak.
Wow. And one thing that struck me when I was watching the government's press conference on this earlier this week is they said that there's pretty much nothing that they can do to stop the spread of this.
Yeah, and I think that's why we felt it was important to talk about this today on the podcast. 6 weeks ago, bird flu was serious and scary, but it felt so far away and so obscure, one case in remote WA. Now that it is almost everywhere on mainland Australia and the government's messaging really is everyone needs to prepare themselves for a pretty grim few months ahead, I think the tone of the conversation has shifted.
Hey, I'm Tom, Head of Partnerships at thedailyaus. I lead the team that works with our amazing brand partners to keep the lights on here. And I mean that genuinely. As an independent media business, partnerships allow us to keep doing what we love. You can help us grow by hitting follow or subscribe wherever you're listening or watching this podcast. If you're listening on Spotify or Apple, just go to our podcast show page and the follow button will be there at the top. If you're watching on YouTube, press subscribe. Enjoy the episode and thank you for being a part of the TDA community.
So, take us through what this could mean for the agriculture industry.
Yeah, I think when talking about the H5 response and the impact, we're seeing very much two separate conversations play out, one in terms of the wildlife response and the other being this agriculture response. So Minister Collins confirmed on Monday there is no evidence of any detection in poultry or agriculture systems. For now, the risk to human health, very important to note, remains low. But farmers around the country, particularly in South Australia, are preparing for the worst and they've already changed how they operate. The most urgent concern is about eggs. Now, this all comes down to different styles of egg farming, I suppose. And I mean, I've learnt a lot more about egg farming in the last few days than I ever previously understood. But I guess there are three main types of egg farming to be across. Caged hens, so maybe you'll go to the supermarket, you'll see caged eggs or free range. So caged eggs are hens that are kept indoors in enclosures. Then we've got barn-laid hens. They also live indoors, but they never move outside. So barn-laid eggs might have some freedom of movement within a bigger barn or within a shed, but they don't go outside. Those two types of egg farming are the easiest to protect against H5N1. But of course, consumers have their own decision-making processes involved in their egg purchasing habits, and many people choose or prefer to buy free-range eggs. Free-range and also pasture-raised hens have outdoor access, which the other two types of egg farming don't. So free-range hens will be brought inside and they'll be locked away at nighttime, but they have some access to outside. Pasture-raised hens, and these are the most expensive eggs, pasture-raised hens basically have full outdoor access for their whole lives. There are coops usually where they can go and rest at night and lay their eggs, but they can come and go as they please on those farms. And there are certain laws and regulations that dictate what can be called free range and pasture raised compared to your barn laid or your cage eggs.
And so it's the birds that have access to outside that are now most at risk.
Yes, exactly. And that is because being outside, farmers have no control over what birds fly over their properties, bird droppings. An infected wild bird could very easily end up at one of these farms and leave some droppings or have direct contact with those hens. And that has seen several states now respond with voluntary housing orders. They're asking free-range farmers to move their hens indoors to protect them. But of course, not all farmers have the infrastructure to do that. And it raises these other questions around, consumer behaviours and ethics, I guess.
And it means that those chickens are no longer free range.
Well, yeah, technically, which has caused a bit of tension here. As I mentioned, there are regulations that state you can only label an egg carton free range if the hens actually have outdoor access. So in a bid to alleviate some of that tension, the consumer watchdog, the ACCC, has actually paused its enforcement of free range labelling rules. This is basically in a move to allow farmers who house their birds inside or who are pivoting their strategies to avoid being penalised. They're basically saying it's okay if you're selling eggs as free range and they're not quite as free range as they might seem at the moment, because ultimately you're trying to protect the hens. The deputy chair of the ACCC, Mick Keogh, said farmers need to let retailers and consumers know if birds have been moved inside. Ultimately, it's up to the retailers like the supermarkets to attach some signage to flag that for customers. But it is messy, and that is something the ACCC has acknowledged. Reprinting cartons can take several months. It can require expensive orders. It's really not as simple as a farmer just saying, oh, by the way, that truckload may have some eggs who spent a bit more time indoors this week than last.
And how have farmers responded? I imagine that they're very concerned.
Yeah, broadly, I would say the sentiment from farmers is one of fear, concern. They're taking this really seriously, but there's also an element of, I would say, resignation to the fact that there is an inevitability in some parts of the country that bird flu is going to reach these farming properties. It is going to impact egg supply. A pasture-raised farmer in Victoria, so that's the type of egg farming where the hens have complete access to the outdoors, Zach Jeffries, he spoke to the ABC, and his property actually sits quite close to several infected cases. He told the ABC, I definitely don't like the idea that someone can be marketing their eggs as free range when they're not actually living like that. And he's calling for temporary stickers instead so shoppers know what's actually going on. So he's someone facing a huge loss to his business, but he's not quite satisfied with the idea that cage farming and barn eggs are being held to the same standard as obviously the more expensive type of farming and egg production that comes with free range.
And let's say that bird flu does reach poultry farms. What happens then? Obviously, that will impact the chickens and the hens. Chickens and hens?
Same thing?
Yeah. On the farms, but also that could impact Australia's egg production.
Yeah. So the first step is if a poultry farm detects even one sick bird, they have to cull their entire population. So for some smaller farms, that could be a few hundred chooks. For bigger scale farming productions, that could be thousands and thousands of hens. So basically, affected flocks have to be culled. Then there are biosecurity follow-up regulations like movement restrictions, increased testing, support from various authorities at the state and federal level about how to respond there. But in terms of what that would mean for us, the consumers, and our egg shop, we have seen this before on a smaller scale. You might remember a few years ago, there was a less severe strain, the H7 bird flu strain, that impacted Victoria the worst, but New South Wales was also impacted. That more minor outbreak pushed up prices and led to purchase limits from Coles and Woolies in 2024. So in 2024, we had restrictions on how many cartons of eggs we could buy at any given time. That was a much less severe outbreak. So I would say if this escalates to the point that authorities are warning it might, we will see a reintroduction of purchase limits, perhaps more stringent purchase limits, and certainly the price of eggs and chicken eventually, if it gets to that point, will really skyrocket.
You might not know the answer to this, but if you were to eat an egg from a poultry farm where you later found out that that poultry farm did have bird flu on it,
Yep.
would that pose any risk to the person who ate the egg?
Well, thank you for asking, Billi. I can answer your question. It's a really important one because there is no danger. Poultry and egg remain safe to eat if they are prepared correctly. So as long as you are not putting a raw egg into your protein shake, you
Which
will be.
some people do.
Some people do. You will be completely fine. So as long as you're cooking and handling the product normally, you are safe. The advice from the Australian Centre for Disease Control is that the risk to people is and remains low. H5 rarely infects humans. When it does, it usually involves direct or sustained close contact with sick or dead birds. So the people at risk there would be, the environmental and animal groups who are out in the field collecting sick birds, and similarly farm workers coming into contact with sick hens. There have been some human cases of H5 overseas, mainly farm workers in the United States who, like I said, had prolonged contact with infected animals. So I think that that's really important to note, that don't panic. There is no risk to your human health at the moment.
Yeah.
And
And
question.
yes, question from Orla.
Producer Orla.
How are they going to stop the spread of this virus? Like, you can't just go around vaccinating birds, can you?
Well, there is a vaccine that is in development. It's not quite ready to roll out yet, I believe, but when it is ready, it will be prioritized for chook hen agriculture populations. There is a bit of a conversation going on about, endangered seabirds and whether that wildlife should be prioritized. But I suppose it's easier to target hens because the government and regulators have the most access to farming populations of animals. You can go to a farm, you can find the population of hens that live there, and you can vaccinate them.
Right.
It's a whole different set of circumstances to try to catch, tag, release wild birds.
Is that what they did in 2024?
No. The 2024 response is that they eradicated it in agriculture, so it was a farming problem. We didn't see H7 implicating wild bird species. It's just a less deadly strain, so it wasn't as much of a concern. But it did still cost $110 million to eradicate H7, a much less concerning outbreak. So I think that provides you a bit of an idea of how expensive it's going to be to eradicate. But to the start of your question, Orla, how do they stop it from spreading? The message this week really is we can't stop it. It's too late now. It's gone too far. It's spread too far. It's in too many different types of birds in too many different parts of the country. Really, the messaging has turned to this is going to be bad.
So the government is focusing on that vaccination once it is approved to roll that out. Are they doing anything else?
Yeah, this has been a response several years in the making. So as I mentioned earlier, H5 was first detected in 2021, or first became a global problem in 2021.
But medical authorities had another disease to focus on.
Oh yeah, that old
COVID.
chestnut. But since that point, pretty much, the federal government has been working on this preparedness response, and that includes significant funding across addressing ecological and agricultural concerns. So immediately we've seen increased funding for threatened species breeding facilities. That includes facilities for animals like bilbies and numbats in South Australia. And that investment is about protecting future populations of those animals. There's also extra funding for feral cat control on Kangaroo Island. That ties into the resilience of the sea lion population there. But officials have really been upfront that this spread has started. It can't be eradicated quickly and easily, so the focus is now on building resilience. For the agriculture sector specifically, the government's working closely with poultry farmers on biosecurity measures, so helping different farming operations understand, who's coming and going, what PPE are they wearing? I don't know if that's the right term for people that work on farms, but what are they wearing? What lessons can we take from eradicating H7 to bring into preventing H5 from decimating the industry? There's already more than $113 million that's been committed to this response. Another $24 million was released just last week, and that funding will be shared between the states and territories. That's Commonwealth funding, and authorities haven't ruled out finding more money if the outbreak spreads further into agriculture. There is a lot of attention on this, a lot of conversation about it, and a lot of senior government officials who are saying they are committed to ensuring the agriculture sector can recover from this.
I mean, it sounds like it's only going to get worse from here.
I know it's kind of bleak, but it really is. It is only going to get worse. It's going to be sad. It's going to be hard. There's going to be a lot of farmers doing it very tough. There are going to be a lot of disturbing scenes on beaches and shorelines of seabirds dying. There's going to be species that we love, like cute little seals and little penguins, who are going to take a hit. So I guess it's scary. I don't want to sound too negative and create too much panic, but I think it's important people understand just how devastating H5 has been overseas. And, we are as prepared as we can be, but there are certain risks that we just can't mitigate.
All right. Thank you for taking us through that.
Thank you, Billi. You have a tidbit to cheer us up with.
I do have a tidbit. It's semi-animal related.
Okay.
Red frogs.
Love them.
Love them. Do you remember growing up green frogs?
Yes. Okay. My thing on green frogs is that whenever I was dragged to my brother's sport on the weekend, every single freaking Saturday, Sunday of my life, my big sell was the canteen.
Yeah.
And every local footy club, at least every good one, should have its share of killer pythons.
Yes.
Red frogs. What are the other good ones? The little sherbet lollipop things.
Well, what about the green frogs?
Well, I used to they only had the mixed bag, red and green frogs, and I used to cut a deal with my dad where I'd give him all my green frogs in exchange to get me some red frogs.
Okay, so you weren't a green frog fan.
God, no, they were nasty. My dad is the only person I knew that liked a green frog.
All right, Orla?
Not a red or green frog person.
Oh.
I don't like either of them.
Oh, I've never
They're
met a
just a bit
person like you.
Joy?
They're just a bit chewy, get stuck in my teeth.
All right.
Weird.
Well, you guys are the wrong people to tell this tidbit to, but hopefully there is someone out there who is a green frog fan.
Yeah, Peter Gillespie.
And yes, Emma's dad. Well, I have great news for Peter Gillespie. The green frogs are now back on the shelves.
No.
Yes.
They've been gone for, I want to say, decades?
No.
I can't remember the last time I saw a green frog.
So they were discontinued in 2015, and the reason was because red frogs were outselling them 10-1.
Okay.
Which makes sense.
You got to say that was a smart business decision
Yes.
from Allen's. So why on earth have they brought them back?
Well, because the green frog fandom is a passionate bunch.
Wow.
And they have made Allen's return them, but it is for a limited time only. It's only until September. And I'm hoping there's someone listening to this who is now running to the supermarket to get them.
It's been so long since I had one, I kind of can't remember why I hated them so much. So I would be open to sampling a green frog if Allen's are listening.
If they're listening.
But I need the red with the green for contrast.
We haven't quite done the best endorsement. So if we don't get sent any, I understand.
Hey, I said they made a good business decision in 2015. I get it. They were being outsold by the red frogs. But maybe, hey, justice for the green frog. And you know I love an underdog story.
That is true.
And a grassroots community effort. So kudos to the fans who fought for this and have been rewarded.
Yeah. I reckon they taste better than we remember.
Yeah, probably. I
Yeah.
mean, when I was a kid, I thought broccoli was disgusting. And now I think broccoli slaps. Palates change.
All right, that is where we are leaving today's podcast. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of The Daily Oz. We'll be back later today with the headlines, but until then, we hope you have a good day.